Ilara didn't know that the man who answered the door was the most powerful alpha in the realm. She didn't know that the imposing stone mansion she'd stumbled upon in the storm belonged to the Alpha King himself. And she certainly didn't know that the moment their eyes met, the golden thread of fate would snap into place, binding her soul to his for eternity. All she knew was that she was soaked to the bone, bleeding from a gash on her temple, and desperate enough to knock on a stranger's door in the dead of night. The storm had been relentless for hours, turning the forest paths into rivers of mud and forcing her to seek shelter wherever she could find it. Her threadbare cloak clung to her shivering frame, and her worn boots squelched with every step as she approached the massive oak door. Lightning split the sky above, illuminating the intricate carvings that decorated the entrance. Wolves running beneath a crescent moon. She should have recognized the symbol, should have turned and run. Instead, she raised her trembling fist and knocked. The door opened so quickly she wondered if he'd been waiting. The man who stood before her was nothing like the servant she'd expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges and eyes the colour of liquid amber, he radiated a power that made something deep in her chest flutter with recognition. Dangerous. Everything about him screamed dangerous. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. "I just need a place for one night. I can work for my keep, I can—" "You're bleeding." His voice was deep, commanding, and something in the rough gentleness of it made her breath catch. Those amber eyes swept over her with an intensity that should have terrified her, but instead sent warmth spreading through her chest like honey. It's nothing. I just— Come in." He stepped aside, and she caught the scent of cedar and something wild, something that called to a part of her she'd long forgotten. "Before you catch your death." Every survival instinct she'd honed over years of running screamed at her to flee. Men like this, powerful, commanding, impossibly handsome, they were dangerous. They took what they wanted and left nothing but destruction in their wake. But the storm was growing worse, and she had nowhere else to go. She stepped across the threshold, water dripping from her cloak onto polished stone floors that probably cost more than most people saw in a lifetime. The warmth hit her immediately, wrapping around her like an embrace she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," she breathed, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. He closed the door behind her, the sound echoing through what she now realized was a grand foyer. Tapestries lined the walls, and a massive staircase curved toward the upper floors. This wasn't just a house, it was a mansion, a palace. What had she walked into? "You're shaking." His voice was closer now, and she turned to find him studying her with those devastating amber eyes. "How long have you been out there?" "Since morning." The truth slipped out before she could stop it. "I've been walking for 3 days." Something flickered across his features. Concern, anger, she couldn't tell which. Running from what? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to face. How could she explain that she'd fled from everything she'd ever known? That her own pack had cast her out for something she couldn't control? "It doesn't matter," she said instead, wrapping her arms around herself. "I just need somewhere safe for tonight. I'll be gone before dawn, I promise." "How about forever?" The words were so quiet she almost missed them, but they hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes snapped to his, searching for some sign that she'd misheard, but his gaze was steady, serious. "I don't understand." He took a step closer, and she caught that wild scent again. Pine and rain and something purely male that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. "You asked for one night. I'm offering you as long as you need." "I can't. I don't have anything to offer in return." "I didn't ask for anything." His voice was soft now, gentle, and it did something strange to her heart. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Names had power, and she'd learned to guard hers carefully. But something about this man, this moment, made her want to trust. "Ilara." "Ilara?" The way he said it, like it was precious, made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. "I'm Your Grace?" A woman appeared at the top of the staircase, her voice carefully neutral. "I've prepared the blue chambers as you requested." The woman's deference was absolute, the kind reserved for nobility or royalty. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." He never took his eyes off Ilara as he spoke. "Please have a hot meal sent up and something warm to wear." "Of course, Your Grace." "Your Grace." The title echoed in Ilara's mind as the woman disappeared. She'd sought shelter from a lord, maybe even a duke. "I should go," she whispered, backing toward the door. "I didn't realize. I can't impose on—" "You're not imposing." His hand caught hers as she reached for the door handle, and the contact sent lightning racing up her arm. Heat bloomed where their skin touched, spreading through her chest and settling somewhere behind her sternum like a second heartbeat. The golden thread pulled tight. She gasped, and his eyes darkened with something that looked like recognition, like he felt it too, this impossible connection that defied everything she knew about the world. "Stay," he said, and it wasn't a command but a plea. "Just for tonight, if that's all you can give me, but stay." She stared up at him, this beautiful, powerful stranger who'd offered her sanctuary without asking for her story, who'd looked at her bedraggled form and seen something worth protecting, who touched her like she was precious instead of worthless. The smart thing would be to leave, to run before he discovered what she really was, what she'd done to deserve exile from her pack. Instead, she nodded. "One night," she whispered. His smile was like sunrise, warm and devastating, and full of promise. "One night," he agreed, but something in his amber eyes suggested he was already planning for so much more. The blue chambers were nothing like any room Ilara had ever seen, let alone slept in. Silk hangings in deep sapphire draped the four-poster bed, and a fireplace carved with wolves and moons crackled with warmth that seemed to reach into her very bones. She stood in the doorway, still dripping, afraid to step on the pristine carpet with her muddy boots. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and meant it, "but I can't—" "You can." His voice was gentle but firm, and when she turned, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Winters will bring you something dry to wear. The bathing chamber is through that door." He gestured toward an archway she hadn't noticed, and her eyes widened. A private bathing chamber. In her pack, they'd been lucky to have a communal wash-house. "I don't understand why you're being so kind to me." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "You don't even know me." Something shifted in his amber eyes. "I know enough." "What could you possibly know? I'm nobody. I have nothing. I am nothing. Don't." The command in his voice made her breath catch. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could catch that wild scent that made her wolf whine with longing. "Don't ever say that about yourself." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "It's true. I'm just—" "You're brave." His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped to his side. "You've been walking for 3 days in this storm rather than stay somewhere that hurt you. You knocked on a stranger's door because you had the courage to ask for help. That's not nothing, Ilara. That's everything." The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. Like it was precious. Like she was precious. She'd forgotten what that felt like. "I should let you rest." He moved toward the door, then paused. "If you need anything, anything at all, just ring. Someone will come." "Wait." She caught his sleeve before she realized what she was doing, and the brief contact sent that golden warmth racing through her again. "I don't even know your name." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Adrian." Adrian. She tested the name silently, and it fit him perfectly, strong and elegant and slightly dangerous. "Thank you, Adrian, for everything." His smile was soft, almost tender. "Sleep well, Ilara." She watched him go, noting the way he moved with predatory grace, like every step was calculated, like he was used to being in control of every situation. The door closed with a soft click, and she was alone. The next hour passed in a blur of luxury she'd never imagined. The bathing chamber was marble and gold, with a tub large enough for 3 people and water that stayed perfectly hot no matter how long she soaked. Mrs. Winters had left clothes that fit perfectly, a dress in soft grey wool that was finer than anything she'd ever owned, and undergarments made of silk that felt like a caress against her skin. When she finally emerged from the bathing chamber, a tray of food waited by the fire. Roasted meat that fell apart at the touch of a fork, bread that was still warm from the oven, cheese that melted on her tongue like cream. She ate until she was full for the first time in weeks, then curled up in the massive bed and stared at the ceiling. She should be planning her escape, should be figuring out how to slip away before dawn without anyone noticing. Instead, she found herself thinking about amber eyes and gentle hands and the way he'd said her name like a prayer. She was still thinking about it when she woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't remember leaving open. For a moment, panic seized her. She'd overslept. She was supposed to be gone. But then the scent of breakfast hit her, and her stomach reminded her that she was still hungry despite the feast the night before. A soft knock at the door made her bolt upright. "Come in." Mrs. Winters entered with another tray, this one laden with fresh fruit and pastries that made her mouth water just looking at them. "Good morning, miss. His Grace thought you might be hungry." His Grace. There it was again, that title that spoke of power and position far beyond what she'd imagined. Ilara wrapped the silk robe she'd found at the foot of the bed more tightly around herself. "Where is he? Adrian, I mean. His Grace." "In his study, miss. He asked me to tell you that you're welcome to join him for breakfast when you're ready, or to take your meal here if you prefer." Join him. The thought sent butterflies dancing in her stomach. I should probably eat here." Mrs. Winters smiled knowingly. "He'll be disappointed, but he won't press. That's not his way." After the woman left, Ilara found herself picking at the beautiful breakfast and staring out the window at manicured gardens that stretched as far as she could see. This place was massive, an estate, maybe even a palace. What kind of man was Adrian, really? A soft scratch at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she called for whoever it was to enter. Instead of Mrs. Winters, Adrian himself appeared in the doorway, and her breath caught at the sight of him in daylight. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it was made for sin. But it was his eyes that caught her, those warm amber depths that seemed to see straight through her. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you." She gestured helplessly at the tray, the room, everything. "This is too much. I can't accept all this." "You're not accepting it. You're my guest." He leaned against the doorframe, casual and elegant at the same time. "I wanted to make sure you were comfortable." "Comfortable doesn't begin to cover it. This room is fit for a queen." Something flickered in his expression, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "I'm glad you approve." "I should go." She stood abruptly, needing distance from the way he was looking at her. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough." "Where will you go?" The quiet question stopped her cold. Where would she go? She had no pack, no family, no home. She'd been walking toward the border territories, hoping to find a place where no one would ask questions. But beyond that, "I'll figure something out." "What if I asked you to stay?" Her heart stuttered. "Why would you do that?" "Because I can't stand the thought of you out there alone. Because something about you calls to every protective instinct I have. Because when I look at you, I feel—" He shook his head. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for you to knock on my door." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, and she pressed a hand to her sternum. "You don't know anything about me, about why I was running, what I've done." "Then tell me." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm robe. Some secrets are too dangerous to share. And some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. He pushed off from the doorframe, moving toward her with that predatory grace. I won't press you, Ilara, but I want you to know that whatever you're running from, whatever you think you've done, it doesn't matter to me. It would if you knew. Try me. She stared up at him, this beautiful, powerful man who was offering her sanctuary without conditions, who looked at her like she was worth protecting, like she was worth keeping. For a moment she almost believed it could be that simple. Then reality crashed back in and she shook her head. I can't trust anyone, not any more. I know. His voice was impossibly gentle. But I'll wait. However long it takes, I'll wait. Before she could respond, voices echoed from somewhere in the house. Male voices raised in what sounded like urgency. Your Grace! The call came from downstairs, and Adrian's entire demeanour shifted, becoming sharp and focused in an instant. Stay here, he told her, and this time it was definitely a command. Don't leave this room until I come back. What's wrong? But he was already gone, moving with the kind of speed that spoke of training and instinct. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard voices conferring in tones too low to make out words. Then she heard something that made her blood run cold. Searching every estate in the territory, the Alpha King has ordered... Alpha King. The Alpha King was looking for something, or someone. Her hands shook as she pressed them to the window, staring out at the gardens with new eyes, the carved wolves on the door, the deference of the servants, the wealth and power that surrounded this place like armour. What if Adrian wasn't just nobility? What if he was something more? What if she'd stumbled into the heart of the very realm whose king would see her dead if he knew what she really was? Ilara was already pulling on her boots when the door opened again. Her hands stilled on the laces as Adrian stepped inside, his expression carefully controlled in a way that made her stomach drop. Going somewhere? His voice was too casual, and she recognised the tone. It was the same one her father had used right before delivering devastating news. I heard voices downstairs, something about the Alpha King. She forced herself to meet his eyes, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. I think it's time for me to leave. Sit down, Ilara. I really should. Please. The word was quiet, but something in his tone made her sink back onto the edge of the bed. There's something I need to tell you. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it as if he thought she might bolt, which, to be fair, she was considering. The men downstairs weren't talking about the Alpha King, he said carefully. They were talking to him. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? My name is Adrian Blackthorne. I am the Alpha King. The room spun around her. She gripped the bedpost, her knuckles white as she tried to process what he'd just said. The Alpha King, the most powerful shifter in the realm, the man every pack leader bowed to, whose word was absolute law, the man she'd spent the night under the same roof with, sharing meals and gentle conversation like equals. You're lying. But even as she said it, she knew he wasn't. It explained everything. The mansion, the servant's deference, the way he moved with absolute authority, the way she'd felt compelled to trust him despite every instinct screaming danger. I'm not. His amber eyes were steady, patient, as if he had all the time in the world to let this sink in. I know it's a shock. A shock? She shot to her feet, pacing to the window and back. You're the Alpha King. I asked the Alpha King for shelter like some beggar, and you... She pressed her hands to her face, horror washing over her. God, I cleaned my boots on your doorstep. I dripped mud on your floors. You did exactly what you needed to do to survive. His voice was firm, cutting through her spiral of panic. And I did exactly what I wanted to do. Why? The word came out broken. Why didn't you tell me? When? When you were bleeding and terrified on my doorstep? When you were so convinced you were worthless that you could barely accept a meal? He pushed off from the door, moving toward her slowly, like she was a wild animal he didn't want to spook. When you told me you couldn't trust anyone? She backed away until her legs hit the bed. I can't. This can't be real. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I don't belong here. Stop! The command in his voice made her freeze. Stop saying that about yourself. It's true. I'm a packless Omega with no family, no status, no worth. You're my mate. The words landed like a thunderclap, silencing every protest on her lips. She stared at him, searching his face for some sign that she'd misunderstood. That's impossible. Is it? He was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes, could feel that wild heat radiating from his skin. You felt it too, didn't you, the moment we touched, the golden thread? Her hand rose unconsciously to her chest, where that impossible warmth still pulsed beneath her sternum. That doesn't mean anything. It means everything. His hand covered hers, pressing it flat against her heart. I've been waiting 28 years to feel that, to find you. You can't want me. Her voice broke on the words. I'm broken, damaged. There are 100 reasons why I'm the last person who should be. Tell me. The quiet demand stopped her cold. She stared up at him, seeing nothing but patience and acceptance in his expression. No judgment, no fear. It terrified her more than anything else could have. My father was an alpha, she whispered. A good one, or so everyone said. But he had appetites. He took whatever he wanted, including Omega females who belonged to other males. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My mother was mated to someone else when he forced her. She died giving birth to me. The old pain clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to continue. I'm a bastard, half-breed. My wolf is not wrong. Too strong for an Omega, not strong enough for an Alpha. I don't fit anywhere. That's why you were cast out. They tolerated me while my father lived, but when he died... She shrugged, the gesture hiding a world of hurt. His legitimate heir decided I was a stain on the family name, so they stripped me of my pack bonds and cast me out. No pack will take me now. I'm packless, worthless. You're standing in my home. You're wearing silk that cost more than most people make in a year. You just told the Alpha King your deepest shame, and he's still here. His free hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. How exactly does that make you worthless? Because you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice was rough with an emotion she couldn't name. You think your worth is determined by what others think of you. You think that because your father was a monster and your pack was cruel, you're somehow tainted. But that's not how it works, Ilara. Your worth isn't determined by their actions. It's determined by who you choose to be. I'm nobody. You're my mate. You're going to be my queen. The words were said with such quiet certainty that they stole her breath. You're going to stand beside me and help me rule this kingdom with wisdom and compassion, because those are the things that make you who you are. Not your bloodline, not your past, you. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it was a physical ache in her chest. But I'll bring you nothing but shame. When people find out what I am, let them try. The promise in his voice was dark and absolute. I'd like to see someone tell me my mate isn't worthy of her crown. Adrian, stay. The word was soft, almost pleading. Not because I'm commanding you as your king, but because I'm asking you as the man who's been searching for you his whole life. Stay and let me prove that you're everything I've been waiting for. She looked up at him, this impossible man who'd taken her in without question, who'd shown her kindness when she'd expected nothing, who was now offering her a future she'd never dared dream of. The smart thing would be to run, to leave before she could bring scandal down on him, before the reality of what she was became too much for even his acceptance to bear. But when had she ever been smart where he was concerned? I don't know how to be a queen, she whispered. His smile was radiant. I don't know how to be a king worthy of you. I guess we'll figure it out together. I'm scared. Good. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. Brave people are always scared. That's what makes them brave. What happens now? Now you tell me you'll stay. Not for one night, not for a few days. Stay and be my mate, my queen, my everything." She stared into those amber eyes and saw her future reflected back, not the lonely, wandering existence she'd resigned herself to, but something bright and impossible and beautiful. "I'll stay," she whispered, and felt the golden thread in her chest sing with joy. "But I can't promise I won't run when it gets too overwhelming. Then I promise to catch you every time." His mouth brushed hers, soft and reverent, "and to remind you that you're exactly where you belong." When he kissed her properly, deep and claiming and desperate, she tasted forever on his lips and finally understood what home was supposed to feel like. She was Adrian Blackthorn's mate. The Alpha King had chosen her, broken and worthless as she was. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as worthless as she'd believed. The days that followed were a strange rhythm of stolen moments and growing trust. Adrian showed her the palace, his palace, room by room, each more magnificent than the last. The throne room with its soaring ceilings and ancient wolf carvings, the library that stretched 3 stories high, filled with more books than she'd ever imagined existed, gardens that bloomed even in the depths of winter, tended by magic she didn't understand. But it was the quiet moments that undid her completely. Breakfast shared in comfortable silence while he read correspondence, and she marvelled at the normalcy of it all. Evenings by the fire where he told her stories of the kingdom's history, and she found herself laughing for the first time in months. The way he looked at her like she was precious, like she was exactly where she belonged. She was almost starting to believe it might be true, which of course was when everything went to hell. She was in the garden, picking early spring roses for the breakfast table, a small domestic task that made her feel useful, when the commotion started. Shouts from the courtyard, the thunder of hooves, the sharp bark of orders being given in voices she didn't recognise. But one voice she did recognise, and it made her blood turn to ice. "Where is she?" The bellow carried across the gardens with a force that made the very air tremble. "Where is my worthless whore of a sister?" Marcus, her half-brother, had found her. The roses fell from nerveless fingers as she backed toward the palace, but it was too late. He stood at the garden entrance with 4 of his enforcers, his face twisted with the same cruel rage she remembered from her childhood. "There you are." His smile was all teeth and malice. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever? How did you find me?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, though her hands shook as she pressed them against her skirts. "Oh, sister dear, everyone knows where you are. The great scandal of the season, the Alpha King's mysterious houseguest." Marcus stepped closer, his men fanning out behind him. "Though I suspect His Majesty doesn't know exactly what he's harbouring." "I haven't done anything wrong." "Haven't you?" He laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "You seduced your way into the Alpha King's bed like the whore our mother was before you. But don't worry, I've come to collect you before you can bring any more shame to our bloodline. I'm not going anywhere with you. You will if you don't want everyone to know what you really are." His voice dropped to a vicious whisper. "Shall I tell His Majesty about your little condition? How you killed 3 pack members during your first shift because you couldn't control that freak wolf of yours?" The words hit her like physical blows. She'd never told anyone about that night, the night her wolf had emerged in a rage of pain and confusion, lashing out at anyone who came near. 3 wolves had died trying to calm her, and she'd woken covered in their blood with no memory of how it happened. That was an accident. "Was it? Or are you just a monster pretending to be an Omega?" Marcus's eyes glittered with triumph. "Come with me now, quietly, and I'll keep your secret. Stay, and I'll make sure the entire realm knows exactly what kind of creature has been warming the Alpha King's bed." Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the garden air like a blade. "I'm sorry, but did someone just threaten my mate?" Adrian appeared at the garden entrance, and Ilara's breath caught at the sight of him. This wasn't the gentle man who'd held her through nightmares, or the patient lover who'd coaxed smiles from her reluctant lips. This was the Alpha King in all his terrible glory, power radiating from every line of his body like heat from a forge. Marcus's enforcers took an involuntary step back, their wolves recognizing an apex predator when they saw one. "Your Majesty." Marcus's voice was carefully respectful, but she could see the calculation in his eyes. "I've come for my sister. There's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" Adrian's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. It was the most terrifying thing Ilara had ever heard. "Because from where I stand, it sounds like you just called my mate a whore and threatened to spread lies about her." "Not lies, Your Majesty. Facts." Marcus's smile turned vicious. "Ask her about the night she shifted. Ask her about the 3 wolves who died because she couldn't—" "I know." Adrian's words were quiet, but they carried across the garden like thunder. "I know about that night. I know about your father's crimes and your pack's cruelty. I know exactly what Ilara is, and I can assure you she is everything." The confession hit Ilara like a physical blow. He knew. He'd known all along, and he'd chosen her anyway. "Then you know she's dangerous," Marcus pressed. "Unstable, a threat to—" "The only threat I see here is you." Adrian moved with that predatory grace, placing himself between Ilara and her brother. "You have exactly 10 seconds to leave my land before I show you what dangerous really looks like." "You can't be serious. She's a bastard half-breed who—" Adrian's roar shook the very foundations of the palace. It was a sound of pure dominance, pure fury, and it dropped Marcus and his men to their knees before they could stop themselves. 7 seconds. "The council will never accept her," Marcus gasped from the ground. "She'll bring you nothing but scandal and shame." 3 seconds. "She'll destroy you." Adrian shifted. The great black wolf that stood in the garden was massive beyond anything Ilara had ever seen, with eyes like molten gold and teeth that could tear a man in half. The very air around him thrummed with power, and she felt her own wolf whimper and bow in recognition of its better. Marcus and his men didn't wait for the count to finish. They scrambled to their feet and ran, stumbling over each other in their haste to escape. When they were gone, Adrian shifted back, his clothes somehow intact. A king's magic, she supposed. He turned to her, and she saw the exact moment his expression shifted from lethal to concerned. "Are you all right?" She stared at him. This man who'd just defended her honour against her own blood, who'd known her darkest secret and chosen to protect rather than condemn. "You knew," she whispered, "about that night, about what I did." "I knew." He moved toward her slowly, like she might bolt. "I've known since the first night. Your scent, it carries the weight of what you've survived." "And you didn't care?" "I cared that you were in pain. I cared that you blamed yourself for something that wasn't your fault." He reached her, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. A 17-year-old girl, shifted for the first time in the middle of being brutalized by pack politics. Of course you lashed out. Of course you couldn't control it. "I killed them." "You survived. That's what matters." "The council will never accept me." Marcus was right about that at least. She pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'll bring you nothing but problems." "Let them try." The promise in his voice was dark and absolute. "I am the Alpha King. My word is law. If I say you are my queen, then you are my queen, and anyone who disagrees is welcome to challenge me for the right." "You can't fight the entire council." "Watch me." He stepped closer, and she caught that wild scent that never failed to make her wolf settle. "Ilara, look at me." She met his eyes reluctantly. "I've been king for 7 years. 7 years of political marriages proposed and rejected, of suitable mates paraded before me like prize horses. Do you know why I refused them all?" She shook her head. "Because none of them were you. Because I was waiting for the woman who would knock on my door in the middle of a storm and trust me with her heart." His hands found hers, warm and steady. "I don't care what the council thinks. I don't care what your brother threatens. You are mine and I am yours, and that is the only truth that matters. What if they're right? What if I'm too broken to—" "You're not broken. You're scarred, and that's different." His thumb traced her cheek. "Scars are proof that you survived something that should have killed you. They're proof of your strength, not your weakness." "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, but you don't have to be scared alone anymore." He pulled her against his chest, and she felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "We'll face whatever comes together. The council, the politics, the gossips, all of it. Together." For the first time since Marcus had appeared in the garden, Ilara felt like she could breathe again. Adrian knew the worst of her violence, her illegitimacy, her broken past, and he'd chosen to defend her anyway. Maybe she really could trust him with the rest of her heart. "What happens now?" she asked against his chest. "Now we make it official." His voice rumbled with satisfaction and something darker. "It's time the realm met their new queen." The way he said it made her shiver, but not with fear, with anticipation. Her brother had tried to drag her back into shame and hiding. Instead, he'd given Adrian the perfect excuse to claim her publicly. She had a feeling Marcus was going to regret that very, very soon. The great hall of the palace had seen many momentous occasions in its 1,000-year history, but Ilara was certain none had felt quite like this. Every Alpha and Luna from across the realm had answered Adrian's summons, packing the vast space until the air thrummed with barely contained power. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over silk and jewels, but beneath the finery she could feel the tension crackling like lightning before a storm. She stood at Adrian's side on the raised dais, wearing a gown of midnight blue that Mrs. Winters had somehow produced in less than a day. The fabric was silk so fine it felt like water against her skin, and the bodice had been embroidered with silver threads that caught the light like captured stars. A circlet of silver and sapphires rested on her brow, not yet a crown, but close enough that everyone in the room understood its significance. "You don't have to do this," she murmured to Adrian, her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way." His hand found hers, warm and steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "They need to understand that you are not some temporary fascination. You are my mate, my queen, and my choice." "What if they refuse to accept it?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "Then they'll learn why I'm called the Alpha King." Before she could respond, the massive doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and Marcus strode in with a contingent of Alphas she didn't recognize. Her half-brother's face was twisted with rage, and when his eyes found her on the dais, his lip curled in disgust. "Well," he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall, "I see the rumours are true. The mighty Alpha King has indeed been bewitched by a bastard whore." Gasps echoed through the crowd, but Adrian didn't move, didn't react. His presence beside her was as solid and unmovable as granite. "Marcus Ashwood," Adrian's voice carried easily through the vast space, calm and controlled. "You were not invited to this gathering." "I invited myself, along with these Alphas who share my concerns about your questionable choice in mates." Marcus gestured to the men flanking him. "We demand to know why you would sully the royal bloodline with damaged goods." "Damaged goods?" Adrian repeated the words thoughtfully, as if testing their flavour. "Is that what you call the woman who survived your father's brutality and your pack's cruelty with her honour intact?" "Honour?" Marcus laughed, the sound ugly and mocking. "She's a killer, your majesty, a freak who can't control her wolf. She murdered 3 of my pack members in cold blood." Murmurs swept through the crowd, and Ilara felt heat crawl up her neck. This was what she'd feared, her shame exposed before the most powerful wolves in the realm. She started to step back, to retreat into the shadows where she belonged, but Adrian's hand tightened on hers. "Stay," he commanded softly, and something in his voice made her spine straighten. "Those 3 pack members," Adrian continued, his gaze never leaving Marcus, "were they perhaps the same 3 who cornered a 17-year-old girl during her first shift? The same three who thought they could use her father's death as an excuse to take what they wanted. Marcus's face flushed red. That's not... Were they or were they not attempting to force themselves on her when her wolf finally emerged? Adrian's voice cut through the hall like a whip. Because I have very detailed reports about what happened that night, and sexual assault tends to leave quite an impression on witnesses. The silence that followed was deafening. Ilara felt every eye in the room turn to her, but for the first time she didn't see judgment in their gazes. She saw shock, understanding, and in some cases sympathy. Even if that were true, one of the alphas with Marcus spoke up. She's still unstable, dangerous. The royal line requires strength, Adrian interrupted. It requires someone who can survive the unsurvivable and still choose compassion over revenge. It requires someone who would risk everything to save others, even when the world has given her nothing but pain. His voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the hall. My mate has all of those qualities and more. Your Majesty, another alpha called from the crowd, his tone respectful but concerned. We only want what's best for the realm. Perhaps a more traditional choice would be wiser. Traditional? Adrian's laugh was low and dangerous. You mean politically advantageous. You mean someone whose pack can offer you trade deals and military alliances, someone you can use to further your own interests. He released Ilara's hand and stepped forward, his presence expanding to fill the entire dais. When he spoke again, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of a king. I have spent 7 years entertaining your traditional choices, 7 years listening to proposals that treated marriage like a business transaction and my mate like a commodity to be bartered. Not once did any of you present me with a woman who could rule beside me as an equal. Not once did you consider what I might actually need in a partner. And what you need is her. Marcus's sneer was audible even across the vast hall. A broken half-breed with blood on her hands. What I need, Adrian said, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every ear, is the woman brave enough to knock on a stranger's door in the middle of a storm. The woman who would rather face exile than compromise her principles. The woman who looked at the Alpha King and saw not a crown or a title, but a man worth trusting with her heart. He turned back to Ilara, and the love in his amber eyes took her breath away. What I need is Ilara Ashwood, who survived hell and chose to heal rather than break, who shows mercy to those who deserve none and kindness to those who've forgotten what it feels like, who is stronger than any wolf in this room and gentle enough to bandage the wounds of her enemies. You can't be serious, Marcus sputtered. The council will accept my choice, or they will find new employment. Adrian's voice was steel, wrapped in silk. I am the Alpha King by right of blood and conquest. My word is law, and my word is this. Ilara is my mate, my queen, and my choice. Anyone who wishes to challenge that is welcome to face me in combat for the right. The challenge hung in the air like a blade. No one moved. No one spoke. Marcus's face cycled through rage, calculation, and finally grudging acceptance. He might be cruel, but he wasn't stupid enough to challenge the Alpha King directly. This isn't over, he growled, but the fight had gone out of him. Yes, it is. Adrian's smile was all teeth. Guards, escort Mr. Ashwood and his companions off palace grounds. They are no longer welcome here. As Marcus and his allies were led away, Adrian turned to face the rest of the gathered alphas and Lunas. Let me be clear, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Ilara is my chosen mate. She will be crowned as your queen, and she will rule beside me with all the authority that title carries. Anyone who cannot accept this reality is free to leave now. No one moved. Good. His expression shifted, becoming warmer, more welcoming. Then let me formally present Queen Ilara, my mate and the future mother of my heirs. The formal words hit Ilara like a lightning bolt. Queen, mate, future mother of his heirs. It was real. It was happening. Before she could fully process it, Adrian was moving back to her side, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "Are you ready to be a queen?" he murmured against her lips. "I'm terrified," she whispered back. "Perfect. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway." His mouth brushed hers, soft and reverent. "And you, my love, are the bravest person I know." When he kissed her properly, claiming her mouth in full view of the most powerful wolves in the realm, the great hall erupted in cheers and applause. But Ilara barely heard it. All she could focus on was the feel of his lips on hers, the strength of his arms around her, and the golden thread in her chest singing with triumph. She was no longer the packless Omega who'd knocked on his door begging for shelter. She was Queen Ilara, chosen mate of the Alpha King, beloved and claimed and home. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed she deserved it. The crowd's cheers washed over them as Adrian lifted his head, his amber eyes blazing with satisfaction and love. "Mine," he whispered against her ear, and the possessive growl in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "Yours," she agreed, and meant it with every fibre of her being. Forever. Forever. The weeks that followed the Great Hall Declaration were a whirlwind of preparation and wonder. Ilara woke each morning in silk sheets that still felt like a dream, in chambers that had been expanded to connect with Adrian's, creating a suite fit for a king and queen. But it wasn't the luxury that took her breath away. It was the little moments that made her feel like she truly belonged. Adrian bringing her tea exactly the way she liked it, prepared with his own hands rather than asking a servant. The way he sought her opinion on matters of state, treating her insights as valuable rather than dismissing them. How he would find her in the gardens or library and steal kisses like a man courting his beloved rather than a king who'd already claimed his mate. She was learning to be a queen, but more importantly, she was learning to be loved. "The eastern provinces are reporting unusual wolf sightings," Adrian said one morning over breakfast, spreading a map across the table between their plates. "Lone wolves, but organised. Someone's building a rogue pack." Ilara studied the marked locations, noting the pattern. "They're moving toward the border territories, testing defences." "That would be my guess." His amber eyes warmed with approval. "What would you suggest?" 6 months ago she would have ducked her head and mumbled something about not knowing enough to comment. Now she leaned forward, tracing possible routes with her finger. Additional patrols here and here, but also safe houses for any packless wolves who might be caught between the rogues and our forces. Not everyone running with rogues does so by choice. Spoken like a true queen. Adrian caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I'll have the orders sent this afternoon." The easy way he incorporated her suggestions into policy still amazed her. In her old pack, Omegas weren't allowed to speak during strategy meetings, let alone contribute ideas. "The seamstress will be here this afternoon for your final fitting," Mrs. Winters announced as she cleared their breakfast plates. "And the council wants to review the guest list one more time." Ilara's stomach fluttered. The coronation was only 3 days away now, and despite all the preparation, part of her still couldn't believe it was real. "They can review it all they want," Adrian said mildly. "The list is final." "Even the pack representatives who've requested audience?" "Especially them." His voice carried an edge of steel. "Anyone who couldn't be bothered to attend the declaration ceremony but suddenly wants to curry favour doesn't deserve a place at my queen's coronation." After Mrs. Winters left, Ilara found herself staring out the window at the gardens where she'd first been confronted by Marcus, where Adrian had defended her so fiercely that even now, remembering it made her chest tight with emotion. "Second thoughts?" Adrian's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the underlying concern. "Never." She turned to face him, and the relief in his expression made her heart ache. "I was just thinking about that first night when I asked for shelter for one night. And I offered forever. Did you know, even then? I knew you were special. I knew my wolf recognized something in you that it had never found before. He moved to stand behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders. I didn't dare hope you'd actually say yes. To one night? To forever. His lips brushed her temple. You could have run 12 times, even after we mated, even after the declaration ceremony. You could have chosen to go back to the free territories. Where would I go? She leaned back against his chest, feeling his arms come around her. You're my home now, and you're mine. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they'd built together. Not just passion, though the fire between them burned hotter than ever. Not just political alliance, though her presence had already begun to change how the packs viewed their king, but genuine partnership, built on respect and trust and a love that grew stronger every day. Your Majesty? A soft knock interrupted the moment. The delegation from the White Mountain Pack has arrived for their audience. Send them to the throne room, Adrian called back. We'll be along shortly. Ilara started to rise, but he caught her hand. You don't have to come if you're not ready. These audiences, some of them are going to be difficult. You mean some of them are going to test whether I'm worthy of the crown? Some of them are going to try. His smile was sharp. They'll learn quickly that questioning you is questioning me. I can fight my own battles, you know. I know, but you don't have to fight them alone anymore. The White Mountain delegation turned out to be exactly what she'd expected. 3 elderly alphas who spent the entire audience addressing Adrian, while pointedly ignoring her presence on the throne beside him. Until one of them made the mistake of suggesting that perhaps a more experienced Luna would be better suited to guide the realm through uncertain times. Experienced in what? Ilara asked pleasantly, speaking for the first time since they'd entered. The alpha blinked at her in surprise. I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. You suggested that someone more experienced would be better suited to the role of queen. I'm curious what experience you think I lack. Well, the experience of leading a pack, of course, managing political alliances, trade negotiations. I see. Ilara leaned forward slightly. And tell me, in your experience leading a pack, how many wolves have you personally rescued from rogue attacks? That is to say, because I've rescued 17 in the past month alone. How many orphaned cubs have you placed in loving homes? I've found families for 23. How many disputes between neighbouring packs have you mediated this season? I've resolved 8. Her voice remained calm, conversational. Perhaps you could enlighten me about what other experience I should be gaining. The throne room was dead silent. Adrian's hand found hers on the armrest of her throne, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in silent approval. Your Majesty, the alpha stammered, I meant no offence. Of course you didn't. Her smile was gracious, but her eyes were steel. You simply wanted to ensure that your future queen was capable of the role. I appreciate your concern for the realm's welfare. When the delegation left 20 minutes later, they were bowing deeply to both thrones. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Adrian murmured as the throne room doors closed. Too late. You're stuck with me now. She turned to face him fully, still amazed that she could sit beside him as an equal, that her voice carried the same weight as his in these halls. Besides, someone has to keep you humble. Is that what you're doing? Among other things. The heat in his amber eyes made her breath catch. Even after all these weeks, he could still make her feel like the most desirable woman in the realm with just a look. What other things? Well, she said, rising from her throne with deliberate grace, I was thinking I could start by showing you exactly how grateful I am for your patience with difficult delegations. Were you now? He stood as well, moving toward her with that predatory grace that never failed to make her wolf purr with approval. She backed toward the private exit behind their thrones, knowing he would follow. I was thinking something involving very little talking and quite a lot of... He caught her waist and pulled her against him, cutting off her words with a kiss that was pure fire and possession. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you," he said against her lips, and the words still had the power to make her knees weak. "I love you too." She traced the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. "My king. My queen. Forever. Forever." 3 days later, Ilara knelt in the ancient cathedral as the high priest placed the lunar crown on her head, silver and moonstone that had adorned queens for 1,000 years. But it wasn't the weight of the crown that brought tears to her eyes. It was the sight of Adrian watching her with such love and pride that it took her breath away. When she rose as Queen Ilara of the Moon Realm, officially and irrevocably, the cathedral erupted in cheers. But all she could hear was Adrian's voice as he took her hand. "Welcome home," he whispered, and she knew he wasn't talking about the palace or the throne or even the realm. He was talking about the space they'd carved out together, the love they'd built from a single night's shelter into something that would last lifetimes. She'd asked for one night. He'd given her forever. And as they walked down the cathedral aisle together, crowned and mated and utterly devoted, Ilara finally understood what the poets meant when they wrote about happily ever after. It wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing from fellow romance lovers around the world. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these stories. Until next time, may you always find the love you deserve.